we got ourselves a new playoff format, don't we? We have ourselves a very new college football format. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself right about now as well, hang on now, hold up, wait a minute. You just told us that we're expanding from 4 to 12 teams, and that's starting this year. So, why are we having these conversations about another playoff expansion? And we already know what that answer is. The answer all along has always seemed to be about the money. The answer has always been, having these people in a room, wanting to have a ATM machine, so to speak, of this college football playoff. And it's not necessarily people in the room that are thinking about the betterment of the players or the betterment of the fans or the game itself, but thinking about what could we do to make the most money possible in a short period of time. And this is a perfect example of that. I mean, you want to talk about, and I'm talking as somebody that was pro college football playoff expansion back to when we were in the midst of a 4-team playoff era. I've always felt to myself, it should expand again, but I'm thinking no more than 8 teams. And the reason why I thought 8 teams at the time, we had 5 power conferences, believe it or not. We had 5 power conferences. The 4-team playoff system was inevitably always going to leave up a power conference champion, not to mention, any group of 5 team that had any resemblance of any shot at a national title, even with the expansion. So I thought 8 teams would have been, that sweet spot, but I didn't want to expand any more than 8 teams. But of course, we have opened up that Pandora's box, and I don't know how we're going to close it back up. I don't know if we can even close it back up, to be honest with you guys here today, because I think to myself, well, they already expanded to 12. They announced that at the beginning of the year, beginning of the previous college football season, and then they mentioned, okay, we're going to 14. We have 14 teams, by the way. And who's to say that we stop there? We might find ourselves in a spot where, a few years from now, because there is a clause in this 14-team playoff where, sometime in 2028, you could have some kind of look in, say there's some major realignment that happens between now and 2028, where we could absolutely see a situation to where the college football playoff is viewed at yet again. But what we do not know is we do not know necessarily what this new format is going to look like. We don't know if the SEC or the Big Ten, are we going to see them get more than one auto bid? Right now, what we're looking at for this 12-team playoff is we are looking at auto bids for each of the power conferences, an auto bid for the best group of 5 team in FBS college football, with the other 7 spots that are currently up for grabs. We don't know what those other 2 spots are going to go to, whether it's going to go to another Big Ten or SEC squad, or if they're going to be considered at large spots. We don't know that information, at least not yet. But what I do know is that we do have a breakdown on how much each of the conferences are going to be making on a per school basis. So this is based off the ESPN article that was written by Heather Denich and Pete Fermel back on the 14th. So it breaks down like this in terms of how revenue is going to be shared during this 14-team playoff period. And this is slated to start in 2026, by the way. So at your very top, you got the Big Ten and the SEC. Those are your top revenue earners. They're going to be both making more than $21 million per year on a per school basis. So Ohio State and say Northwestern, both of them are going to receive $20+ million per year because of this college football playoff. Then you have the second tier. You got the ACC making slightly more than the Big 12. The ACC is making $13 million annually on a per school basis. The Big 12 will get around $12 million. And that's also the watermark that Notre Dame is expected to receive as well. Surprised that it's not more towards the ACC side, because the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, they are an ACC school, with the exception of football. They strike at it alone in football, but they're one of the few independent teams that can strike out on their own because of their brand, because their branding allows them to do precisely that. And what we also know is that part of the reason why we do end up seeing the ACC receiving slightly more than the Big 12 is that as of right now, counting Notre Dame when they were a part of the ACC in 2020, the ACC was able to have 8 college football playoff semifinalists. The Big 12, on the other hand, even with the inclusion of Cincinnati, when they did it as an American Conference member, they will only have 2, Cincinnati and then TCU in a couple of years ago for the 2022-2023 season. Of course, many of the appearances for the Big 12 were Texas and Oklahoma. Both of those schools are now in the SEC. Finally, we have your lowest tier, and that's the group of 5 schools. So the group of 5 schools barely get any sort of pay raise out of this current arrangement. So all the group of 5 schools were making $1.5 million from the 12-team playoff. That gets bumped up to just $1.8 million. So a $300,000 raise. What we see is, yes, the group of 5 schools are going to be a little bit richer as a result of it. That gap between the power conferences and specifically the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be so much larger of a gap between them and the group of 5 than what we have ever seen before. And what also makes it messy is that there is no longer a participation bonus for any of the leagues, period, which is a detail that, according to the reporting on this article, is frustrating for some of the leaders in the group of 5. And I think that's one of the bigger issues. Well, that's one of 2 big issues that I have with this new college football playoff format. One, well, actually, now I think about it, 3 separate ones. So first big issue is that I have is, first and foremost, I have no idea how this 12-team format is going to play out during the regular season. What kind of effect is it going to have in terms of the interest that college football fans are going to have on the regular season? Because a larger playoff format could benefit something like college basketball, where the season is more centered around the college like the postseason of college basketball. But many casual fans in college basketball really aren't starting to tune in until maybe early to mid-February. People aren't really sitting in for those November, December, or January games. Are we going to have a similar effect in college football, particularly maybe in some of the bigger games? We could lose some of that urgency that we see maybe from some of the top teams in the country that would be considered heavier favorites, so to speak, in terms of winning a national championship. Because at least in the previous 4-team playoff, what we have seen and witnessed is, if you lose one game, there is a very good chance that you're going to be out. So even though it was expanded to 4 teams, odds are you're going to have to go undefeated in this regular season in order to have a legitimate opportunity to go to the college football playoff. You could still get in with 1 loss, but it's going to be a little bit harder. 2 losses, at least in the 4-team playoff era, you might as well kiss your hopes goodbye. You don't have a singular shot unless we have 2007 level chaos dialed up to a 9. But now, on the same token, Georgia could drop a couple of games. They could lose 3 games this year, and there's still a chance that Georgia's still going to make the playoff. And they still might make a run at the national championship because of how complete their roster is. That is going to be the big difference between 4 and 12 teams. And because, the Georgias, the Ohio States, the Texases of the world, they can lose 1, 2, and possibly 3 games. We lose some of that urgency. And being able to bring down to win those particular big games throughout a college football season. And because we lose that urgency, are we going to lose some interest in some of those particular games? There's, not as much on the line, so to speak, if there's more of a guarantee that you're going to be able to make the playoff. And it also moves us closer to an NFL style format. The NFL style format being that, listen, there's 32 teams in our league. We got 14 playoff spots, anyways. So, whoever has the 14 best records essentially makes it into the NFL playoffs. That works in the NFL because the gap between the best NFL team and the worst NFL team is not nearly the same as the best college football team in America and the worst college football team in America. Case in point, Penn State this past season is a perfect example of that. If you look at Penn State's schedule from last year, there was 2 key games that could have gone either way, the Ohio State game and also the Michigan game as well. They lost both of those games, but under a 12-team format, because they went 10-2, they'll probably be in this college football playoff now when they were expected to win 10 games anyway. So you could drop both of your key games. You might not be able to win a single key game this season, but you could still find yourself in a same playoff as the very teams that beat you during the regular season. You see what I'm saying? So that's a big concern that I have. Also, 14 teams is just weird. It's just a weird size, in my opinion. At least 12 makes more sense in my eyes, in the idea that we at least know how we could go about having the bye system. More teams have the opportunity to get buys. But in 14 teams, we don't necessarily get that either. Now do we? Now it goes from 4 teams getting a bye to now 2 teams getting a bye. I don't know. It just feels weird. It feels like a weird number. I feel like if you're going to expand it to 14, you might as well go to 16. 16 in my eyes makes a lot more sense if we are going to expand it that far. Now, again, me personally, I would prefer that we would have an 18 playoff. If we have an 18 playoff, that was what would make the most sense for me personally, given how many teams actually do have a legitimate shot at winning a national championship. And finally, one of the bigger issues that I have, but I haven't already touched on already, is that revenue sharing that was established in this ESPN article. I don't know how you could not just go about making sure that basically do something like what the NCAA tournament does for basketball. Do it based off of, okay, so if the SEC actually earns free spots, you get X amount of money and then get additional tokens for every college football playoff game your conference wins. Because I mean, there is real chances that the Big Ten might not be able to win a game in the college football playoff under this format. Or if the SEC doesn't win a game, should they still get more than maybe a conference that maybe overperforms expectations, wins more games in the college football playoff? That doesn't make sense to me. So do like a system in March Madness where if you want to decide revenue sharing, do it based off of the results on the field. I don't think a losing team should be able to get more than maybe a team that had more success in the college football playoff that year. But I don't know. I'm not a fan of it, but we did open up that Pandora's box. Let me know how in that comment section how you guys feel about these particular arrangements. It's a weird time to be alive in college football. A lot of changes that are happening at the same time.